All right. So now we're gonna look at the cerebrum and we're gonna label the two sides. I'll do the left side.
Okay.
So the left side is on the left, correct?
That's where it would be.
And is it on the left when I'm looking at it like this
Yep,
or
just
like
that.
this? So when I'm looking at it with the brainstem towards me, the left cerebral hemisphere is on that left side.
And then, of course, the right cerebral hemisphere is on the right side.
So, Mr. Newson, is it true that the left side of your brain controls the right side of your body?
Yes, and yes.
Cool
So
fact.
yeah, so the brain actually is kind of like weird and funky the way that it's wired. And in the brain, a lot of the neural pathways crisscross. So, for example, what you see out of your left eye is actually processed on the right side of your brain. And what you see out of your right eye is processed on the left side of your brain. Really
That's
crazy.
so crazy. So, speaking of wiring, the corpus callosum, is that just the line that cuts through the middle of the brain?
So, the corpus callosum is a bundle of nerves that's inside the brain that we'll be able to see a little bit towards the end. And that's what connects the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere together. So, it's kind of like what links them and lets them share information between each other.
Okay, so we'll skip that for now. Okay, let's focus on the frontal lobe. All right, so the frontal lobe. Now, what does the frontal lobe do? Well, first of all, it's in the front. So I'm gonna put my flag right there up top. So what does the frontal lobe do? This is where the motor cortex is?
Not the motor cortex. The frontal lobe, well, I guess, yeah, the motor cortex is at the back of the frontal lobe. So almost in the rest of your brain.
So the motor cortex controls your body, right?
Yeah. So whenever you're thinking about what you're going to do next, if I'm like, I'm going to move my arm and pick up these forceps, the motor cortex is what told my hand to move and pick this up.
Okay. So what's in the front of the frontal lobe? Is that where you do all your thinking?
That's exactly right. So the frontal lobe is where like your personality is at. It's what lets you make decisions. It's what lets you think about what you're going to do or what you've already done. And it's where most of like your consciousness is at in your brain.
So the frontal lobe is what makes me an amazing teacher?
I guess so.
Okay, moving on. Oh, we got some more frontal lobes. So this is the human frontal lobe, and there it is in the sheep. It looks a lot smaller in the sheep. I guess they're not thinking as much as we are.
Yeah, probably not.
All right, so now we have the parietal lobe. Am I saying that right?
Yep, that's exactly right. The
Like
parietal lobe.
Okay, parietal lobe. And it looks like this one is where the sensory cortex is. So would I be correct to assume that this is where you take in stimuli through your senses?
100% correct. So the parietal lobe is where things like touch, temperature, taste, that's where that stuff is all processed. So all of your neurons that detect those things link up to the parietal lobe. And that's where your brain makes sense of what your body is taking in through those senses.
So check this out. In the human brain, it doesn't look as big as the sheep brain. I wonder why.
I don't know.
Maybe sheeps are really sensitive.
I wonder if it hurts when they get all their wool chopped off.
Oh, I always wonder that too. Okay, so now we're on the occipital lobe. That word is hard for me for some reason. All right, so the occipital lobe is where you see stuff, but it's all the way in the back of your brain, which is kind of weird. Seems like your brain was built backwards. So the occipital lobe has to do with vision and how you perceive things through your eyes. And even some short-term memory. And that's all the way in the back of your cerebrum. So there it is on a human, and there it is in the sheep. So right there. All right, we have one flag left, which is for the temporal lobe. I'll let you do this one.
Yeah, so the temporal lobe is located on the sides of the brain. So what you see on the screen right now is the temporal lobe in our brains on the left side and the right side, kind of literally all the way on the side. And what's in the temporal lobe is your auditory cortex. So this is like where your ears link up to your brain. And it's where your brain makes sense of all the vibrations that your ears pick up and turn those into the sounds that we understand and recognize.
Cool. So there it is on a human, and here it is on the sheep. So it looks like it's kind of on just right on the sides where your ears would be. So that one seems to make sense. All right, well, that's it for our labeling. Now we'll cut it open and see what's inside.
Lego.